Alright, so for modern gaming systems, you really can't go wrong with cases that are 20 liters and under. We've seen plenty of gaming builds before that really don't compromise too much on thermal performance and noise performance, but are seriously compact to the point where you can put them in a backpack or carry-on luggage if you want. We've even seen how you can take something like the Ryzen 3950X, a 16-core CPU, and put that in a 12.5 liter case like the N-Case M1, and again, just get really good performance overall. But what if you want to build something a bit bigger? Let's say you're interested in Threadripper like the 32-core 3970X or the upcoming 3990X, the monstrous 64-core CPU, or let's say you just want a multi-GPU setup for deep learning or parallel compute or something like that. This is an upcoming case called the Chimera CX2 that would be ideal for just that. This can accommodate multiple GPUs, an E-ATX motherboard, and a 280mm radiator installed at the front, all in a 23 liter compact and aluminium enclosure. The designers of the case have allowed me to take a look at their prototype here, so to give them a bit of feedback and also to get a bit of feedback from you guys. Just a heads up, there won't be any thermal testing in this video because they didn't ship me a side panel. Apparently there was a mishap with shipping, but still though, we will be taking a very close look at the Chimera CX2, and if you are in the market for a very compact E-ATX workstation enclosure, this is potentially a case that you might be interested in. So by no means is this a tiny desktop enclosure, but at 23 liters, it is extremely compact for a case that can house E-ATX motherboards with some room to spare. It's also one of the smallest cases out there to accommodate 165mm of CPU cooler clearance, and this means that you can install some of the most powerful options out there like Noctua's NH-D15. By virtue of this though, the footprint of the CX2 is a bit larger than the Cerberus cases, which are also aimed at compact workstation builds. The design is overall fairly boxy, which I do like, but at first glance the CX2 almost looks like a pre-built from Dell. But looking a bit closer, you'll notice things like the premium build quality. So for those of you guys who are familiar with the N-Case M1 and the Dan A4 SFX, those two cases are manufactured by Lee & Lee. Some of you probably could tell that already because they do use very similar panels or identical panels to what you'll find on something like the Lee & Lee TU150, also an ITX case. So the same thing here with the CX2, it's going to be manufactured by Lee & Lee, which means that we're still going to get those nice premium aluminium panels with a nice premium but lightweight construction. It also means that we get a handle as an option, just as we had with the Lee & Lee TU150. Exact same design, but now just bolted on a larger case. I'm not one for handles personally, I just see these cases more appropriate for desktop systems where you're not really going to be carrying them around the street, but I do feel like a handle is more appropriate for a larger case like the CX2. It does use magnets to lock into place and also to recess back into the panel, but this current handle design poses a lot of issues with this build. Because the handle folds back into the case, you end up with this pretty big box on the roof in the interior. So here is the handle, it snaps out of place like that, and as you just saw, the box that this leaves in the interior poses a tremendous amount of issues, at least on this prototype here. I have spoken with the designers of the case and they are thinking of switching the handle to a new design because the issues that this imposes to the rest of your build is really quite severe. So for example, E-ATX motherboards, which would have otherwise fit, don't fit because the VRM heatsinks are simply too tall. Another issue was that I couldn't actually install an ATX power supply at the back here because the box was just too deep into the case, and other issues like not being able to properly secure a fan to a CPU cooler, not being able to access the header ports on the motherboard, and a whole range of issues, but hopefully they do get this sorted because this handle just does not work for this compact nature of this case. Now the thermal design of the CX2 is completely front to back, aiming for this sort of wind tunnel approach similar to the new Mac Pro. The top panel will be completely blocked off to help channel this air to the back of the case, and for the side panel you have the option of, again, a completely blocked off panel like the top one, or you can go for a completely vented panel or a tempered glass panel. Radiators can be mounted at the front and bottom, so a completely liquid cooled system will be no issue at all. Bottom radiators up to 240mm are supported with total thickness depending on how many PCI Express devices you have installed, and you can install a 280mm at the front with radiator and fan thickness depending on the length of your graphics cards. All up, I measured the interior length of the case at 340mm, so you'll be hard pressed to find any graphics cards that don't fit here. Now, as an example, with an RTX 2080 Super Founders Edition, which comes in at 267mm long, you've got a little over 70mm of combined radiator and fan clearance to play with at the front. The configuration that you're looking at here has a standard 280mm AIO installed at the front, leaving about 20 to 30mm of clearance between the graphics cards. If you plan on using water blocks on your cards, usually they will take up that extra 20mm because they are slightly longer than the PCB. But if you want to do a dual radiator configuration, it will be a tight fit, but it can work. Again, just keep in mind the 340mm combined length measurement, so that would be the total thickness of the front mounted fans and radiator plus the total length of the bottom mounted radiator itself. Power supply mounting is interesting in the CX2. If you are liquid cooling your CPU, you can mount an ATX power supply towards the back of the case, towards the motherboard. Just keep in mind this isn't going to be ideal for VRM thermals. You might want to implement your own onboard VRM cooling there. That option would be ideal though if you want to populate as many PCIe devices as possible and make use of all 8 expansion slots. Otherwise, you can actually install an SFX power supply at the very bottom of the case by removing the bottom 3 expansion slots and swapping that over to the included PSU mounting bracket. So installing an SFX power supply at the bottom of the CX2 will take up 3 expansion slots, but then it clears up all of this room at the top if you want to run a massive air cooler like the NHD15. Personally, I do think that 165mm air cooler clearance is a big selling point for this case because there aren't many cases out there this compact that have that clearance available. One big issue though that I came across when installing an SFX power supply at the bottom was the length of the SFX power supply cables themselves. Now, the EPS and the PCIe cables are usually about 400mm long, but the 24-pin power cable on the Corsair SFX power supplies are only 300mm long, and I didn't find that to be long enough to reach the bottom of the SFX power supply to the 24-pin connector on an ATX board, so that can only really be fixed with a 24-pin extension, which is definitely something to keep in mind. For storage, brackets will be included for 3.5-inch and 2.5-inch drives for mounting at the bottom and the top. Just keep in mind that this will eat up radiator and fan space. Alright, so that's mostly what you need to know about the CX2 in terms of compatibility and whatnot, but now let's talk about the pricing and availability. And these are two things that are just generally not in these premium small form factor cases' favor. Now, the price here does look fairly reasonable when you consider that the NKSM1 and the Dan A4 SFX are currently retailing for about $210 when they're available. They're aiming for the CX2 to be sub $200, so hopefully we can get it in the $170 to maybe $180 range. But the big thing is availability for me personally. I am just not confident in the availability of this case, if I am completely honest. After seeing the NKSM1 and the Dan A4 SFX being out of stock just so consistently, and when they are in stock, they're just really small batches, it doesn't leave me much confidence for the CX2. And trust me guys, I really want to be wrong here. I want this case to succeed, and this could very well be a mainstream recommendation from me. But again, I do feel like it's going to be limited and held back by how many they can actually produce and sell. If you are interested in this sort of thing though, like a really compact E-ATX enclosure that doesn't compromise too much on radiator support, I can highly recommend the Sliger Cerberus and Cerberus X. The pricing there is a bit steep. It's going to be a bit dearer than what the CX2 is aimed at. Build quality is also a lot better on the CX2, but it's definitely not appalling on the Sliger cases. But the big thing there is that the Cerberus and Cerberus X are actually in stock. You can buy them now and they ship pretty quickly. I have built in both of those cases and can definitely recommend them. Now, I can also see the CX2 being popular for those who have a massive, ATX or EATX system, but just want to downsize without compromising too much on their hardware and, having to buy a mini ITX motherboard and SFX power supply and stuff like that. This potentially can fit full ATX hardware in it and allow you to downsize the volume and footprint of your rig tremendously. So the Chimera CX2 then is potentially two things. It's a compact E-ATX enclosure that's ready for thousands of dollars of workstation hardware, and it's also an entry-level small form factor system for those wanting to bridge the gap to smaller volume cases. So those are my thoughts on the CX2. I'd love to know your thoughts too down below in the comments. As always guys, a huge thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.